We all know how Cain's story begins, but almost everyone gets the ending wrong. While Abel's story ended in the soil, Genesis follows Cain into a world that shouldn't have existed yet, a world of secret cities, mysterious wives, and a protective mark that was never actually a tattoo. What happened to Cain after he killed Abel, and how much of the story people repeat is actually in the Bible? The answer begins with the ground beneath Cain's feet. Cain had been a farmer, a worker of the soil. But after Abel's blood was shed, God told Cain that the ground itself would resist him. When he cultivated it, it would no longer give him his strength. The occupation that had defined Cain could no longer support him as it once had. That was the first part of his punishment. The second was movement. Cain would become a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. This is an early answer to the title's question. Cain was not immediately executed. He was stripped of stability. The farmer lost his dependable relationship with the soil, and the man who had destroyed his brother's life lost the security of home. But Cain's response creates the first mystery. He protested that the punishment was more than he could bear. He said he would be driven from the land, hidden from God's presence, and left vulnerable. Then he added something strangely specific. Whoever found him might kill him. Who was Cain afraid of? Genesis has mentioned Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. Abel is dead. Yet Cain speaks as though other people already exist or soon will exist and might seek revenge. Instead of explaining who those people were, God answers the danger. Anyone who killed Cain would suffer vengeance sevenfold. Then God gave Cain a sign so that anyone who found him would not kill him. That sign is usually called the mark of Cain. But notice what the passage does not say. It never describes the sign's appearance. It does not call it a tattoo, a scar, a letter, a change of skin color, or a supernatural glow. Every attempt to draw it as one of those things goes beyond Genesis. Its purpose is clearer than its form. The sign protects Cain from being killed. That creates the central contradiction of his aftermath. Cain is judged, but also protected. His punishment remains, but his life is preserved. God does not declare the murder unimportant, and Cain does not escape its consequences. Yet vengeance is not handed over to whoever wants it. If you value Bible investigations that separate what the text says from what tradition adds, subscribe to Verse Unseen. That distinction matters throughout the rest of Cain's story. Cain then leaves the presence of the Lord and settles in the land of Nod, east of Eden. If you look for Nod on a map today, you will not find a location anyone can verify. Its name is closely related to the Hebrew language of wandering used earlier in the passage. That may be deliberate wordplay. The wanderer enters a land whose very name echoes wandering. But another detail does not fit the simplest picture. Cain was condemned to restless movement, yet the next verse shows him building a city. Before reaching that city, Genesis introduces Cain's wife. The passage simply says that Cain knew his wife, she conceived, and she gave birth to a son named Enoch. It never says where she came from, when Cain married her, or what her name was. The most familiar explanation is that she was a sister or another close relative. Genesis later says Adam had other sons and daughters, and its genealogies regularly name only selected people. If Cain lived among an expanding family over a long span of time, his wife could have come from that wider family. It is a logical guess inside the Genesis story, but the Bible never actually says it. The text does not identify her. Cain's fear of being killed is similar. It may point to unnamed brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, or later descendants who would learn what he had done.
Some readers think the story assumes a larger human population without explaining its origin. Others understand the compressed genealogy to leave enough time for Adam and Eve's family to multiply. That still doesn't completely answer Cain's fear. Genesis never names the people he imagined finding him. Hold on to that question, because the wife, the city, and the generations that follow show why Cain may not have been as alone as the short account makes him seem. Genesis doesn't pause to settle the question. Its focus is not population mathematics. Its focus is the spread of violence and the human attempt to build life outside Eden. Then the story changes. Cain is not only building a family in exile. The man sentenced to wander begins creating a place meant to stay.
Cain's wife gives birth to Enoch, and Cain builds a city bearing his son's name. The word translated city does not require a giant metropolis. It can describe a settled, defended community. Still, the image is striking. The man sentenced to wandering becomes a city builder. The man who lost his brother establishes a family line. The man who fears being found creates a place where people can gather behind boundaries. Was Cain resisting his punishment by building a permanent settlement? Was the city an attempt to create security without restored fellowship with God? Or does it simply show that his wandering eventually included a new form of settled life? Genesis does not explain Cain's motive. It reports the city, but not the intention behind it. Any confident answer must be labeled interpretation. The city also closes one question and opens a more important one. Cain survived, but what kind of world grew from his survival? Genesis traces his descendants through Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, Methushael, and Lamech. Then it slows down and names the cultural achievements of Lamech's children. Jabal becomes associated with tent-dwelling and livestock. Jubal becomes associated with music, including stringed instruments and pipes. Tubal-Cain becomes a worker of bronze and iron. The family line includes herding, music, craftsmanship, and technology. On the surface, this looks like progress, but as the tools become sharper, the story of Cain's family becomes darker. And that is where Lamech enters. This matters because Genesis does not present Cain's descendants as incapable of creativity. Human skill continues outside Eden. Cities rise, instruments are made, metal is shaped, civilization develops. But that is only half the picture. The genealogy ends with Lamech, and Lamech brings the violence of Cain back into view. Lamech takes 2 wives, the first recorded case of polygamy in the biblical story. Then he delivers a violent poem to them. He boasts that he has killed a man for wounding him, and he turns God's 7-fold protection for Cain into a claim of 77-fold vengeance for himself. The comparison is deliberate. Cain feared revenge and received protection from God. Lamech boasts that his own retaliation will be vastly greater. What began as one brother murdering another has become a culture in which violence can be celebrated as power. Cain's line therefore carries a painful contrast. It produces tools, music, livestock culture, and city life, while the spirit of vengeance grows more extreme. The text is not saying that cities, music, or metalwork are evil. It is showing that cultural progress does not automatically produce moral progress. A society can become more skilled while its violence becomes more sophisticated. Now return to the image from the beginning. Cain walking away alive. God's protective sign prevented immediate revenge, but it did not erase consequences. Cain gained a wife, a son, and a city. Yet Genesis never records him returning to God's presence. It never describes reconciliation with his parents. It never says he repented. It never tells us how or when he died.
And it does not say that the protective sign guaranteed Cain's forgiveness or eternal destiny. It tells us what the sign did in his earthly life. It warned others not to kill him. The New Testament remembers Cain negatively. Hebrews contrasts Abel's faithful offering with Cain's. 1 John presents Cain's hatred of his brother as the opposite of love. Jude uses the way of Cain as a warning. None of those passages fills in the missing years of his biography. So, what happened to Cain after he killed Abel? According to Genesis, he was condemned to an unstable life away from the ground that had sustained him. He feared human vengeance, but God protected him from being killed. He went east of Eden to Nod. He had a wife and a son named Enoch. He built a city named for that son. His descendants became associated with major forms of early culture, but the line culminated in Lamech's boast of escalating violence. What happened after that is not revealed. Cain's death, his final years, the appearance of his sign, and the state of his heart remain outside the text. That silence is not an invitation to invent an ending. It is part of the warning. Cain built a life after Abel, but he could not build his way back to innocence. His story shows judgment without immediate destruction, mercy without the removal of consequences, and civilization without guaranteed moral change. Which unanswered detail changes the story most for you? Cain's protective sign, the identity of his wife, or the people he feared? Share your answer below. And if you want to follow the mystery Cain himself raised, the next investigation is the obvious one. Who exactly was Cain afraid of?